Ethan never imagined that a simple family dinner would become the turning point of his entire life. He walked into Madison's parents' house expecting warm conversations about the wedding, not a bombshell that would flip their future upside down. Right as everyone settled at the table, Madison calmly announced she wanted a prenuptial agreement and complete financial separation. But before Ethan could even process that shock, she added that the house they were about to buy still had to be owned 50-50. The room fell silent, forks frozen midair, as Ethan realized the woman he loved was asking for independence only when it benefited her. That night became the first crack in a foundation he thought was unbreakable. And from that moment on, nothing in their relationship would ever be the same again. Ethan and Madison had spent months planning their future, and the first major step was buying a house together. They toured dozens of properties, compared loans, and crunched numbers late into the night. In the end, they agreed on a clear arrangement. Ethan would cover 60% of the down payment, and Madison would take care of the remaining 40%. Ethan transferred his $50,000 immediately so they wouldn't lose the house they both loved. Madison promised she would send her share within the week, insisting she only needed a little more time to move things around in her accounts. Ethan trusted her completely. He believed they were building something solid, something shared. When Ethan withdrew from the house contract, everything collapsed faster than anyone expected. Madison had been counting on his financial weight to push the loan through, and without him listed as a buyer, the bank immediately flagged her application. The loan officer requested updated documents, higher income verification, and additional proof of long-term stability, requirements Madison simply couldn't meet on her own. Her salary alone didn't reach the threshold for the mortgage they had planned together. Within days, the bank issued a rejection. Madison called Ethan in a panic, her voice sharp, asking why he had ruined everything. Ethan reminded her calmly that she had insisted on financial separation and a prenup, which made it clear she wanted to keep the house fair only when it benefited her. But Madison refused to acknowledge her contradictions. She insisted he had overreacted, that he should have talked to her again, and that backing out made him look unreliable. The irony of her words stung, but Ethan stayed silent. When Madison realized she couldn't salvage the loan, desperation set in. The $5,000 she had already paid for the initial deposit vanished the moment the offer fell through. The seller moved on, listing the house back on the market without hesitation. Madison was furious, not at the bank, not at the situation, but solely at Ethan. In her mind, he had sabotaged her dream home. Her parents echoed her anger. They called Ethan repeatedly, leaving voicemail after voicemail, demanding to know why he abandoned the responsibility of buying the house. They insisted that a real man would have stepped up and made it work regardless of disagreements. They dismissed his concerns about fairness and trust as emotional overreactions. To them, the house was a strategic investment for Madison's future, and his refusal to play along disrupted their plans. One evening, Madison's mother called Ethan directly. She didn't yell, but her disappointment was thick and sharpened like a blade. She said Madison had been humiliated in front of the entire family, that everyone was now questioning Ethan's commitment, and that the canceled house made it seem like he was never serious about marrying her. Ethan listened quietly, feeling the weight of their expectations pressing on his chest. But behind that pressure, there was something even heavier, the realization that none of them had considered his perspective at all. The next week turned into a storm of accusations, guilt-tripping, and emotional manipulation. Madison kept texting Ethan long paragraphs about how he had let her down, while her father insisted Ethan come over to resolve things like adults. But every conversation boiled down to the same message. Ethan should pay more, contribute more, sacrifice more, yet receive no equal share, no recognition, and no protection in return. It was as if the house had never been a partnership. It was a plan that relied entirely on Ethan's money and Madison's terms. As the dust settled, Madison was left without a house, without her deposit, and without the financial support she had taken for granted. She told her friends that Ethan had blindsided her, conveniently omitting the prenup demand and her insistence on keeping everything separate. But Ethan no longer cared about defending himself. The situation had exposed something deeper, something undeniable. Madison had never intended to build a future with him. She intended to build a future on him. And for the first time, Ethan felt a strange sense of clarity. Painful but liberating. Madison refused to accept the consequences of losing the house and the deposit. She immediately reached out to friends she trusted, asking them to mediate and help Ethan see reason. The proposals they presented were shocking. Instead of finding fair compromises, Madison and her allies suggested arrangements that heavily favored her while asking Ethan to give even more money. They ignored the fact that he had already invested $50,000 and risked his credit and financial security. The numbers simply didn't add up in a way that made sense. Ethan listened politely during the negotiations, but inside, he was growing more frustrated. It became clear that Madison wasn't interested in a genuine solution. She wanted Ethan to bear all the risk and responsibility, while she maintained control over her own finances and limited obligations. Every suggestion seemed crafted to make him feel guilty, while she gained more security. It was no longer about a house or even money. It was about control. Then came the revelations that truly shocked Ethan. Through mutual friends, he discovered that Madison had been boasting to her social circle that he was nothing more than a wallet with a ring. She described him as someone who existed solely to fund her lifestyle, to pay for her dreams while she maintained complete independence. The words cut deeper than any argument. They revealed a side of Madison he had never seen in person, a side that had been hidden behind smiles, wedding plans, and promises. The online world quickly mirrored the personal betrayals. Madison shared a distorted version of their story on social media. She painted Ethan as selfish, unreasonable, and controlling, leaving out every detail of her own demands. Friends and acquaintances began taking sides, many of them criticizing Ethan without ever hearing his perspective. He watched helplessly as his reputation and intentions were twisted, realizing that fighting back publicly would only escalate the conflict. Family pressure intensified the situation. Madison's parents presented another proposal that seemed like negotiation, but was anything but fair. They demanded that Ethan pay more than his original share, yet he would still only receive half of the house. It was an impossible setup, and Ethan knew it. Every conversation reinforced a single truth. They weren't interested in compromise or partnership. They wanted Ethan to sacrifice and lose, while Madison gained everything. By this point, Ethan had stopped arguing. The emotional manipulation, the social attacks, and the unfair demands made him step back. He realized that he was not just negotiating a house or a wedding. He was negotiating for respect, fairness, and trust, and none of those values existed in Madison's plan. The very foundation of their relationship was crumbling, not because of money, but because of intention. Ethan also began noticing patterns in Madison's behavior that had been hidden before. Little comments, subtle manipulations, and moments where she subtly shifted blame suddenly made sense. The more he reflected, the more he understood that her goal had never been a shared future. It had always been to secure financial advantage for herself. The prenuptial agreement, the social media narratives, the family interventions, all of it pointed to a single, uncomfortable truth. Madison was using him. For the first time, Ethan allowed himself to accept what he had been avoiding. He wasn't failing her, she was failing him. And in this clarity, a resolve began to form. He would no longer participate in a one-sided arrangement. The story of partnership he had imagined was a fantasy, and it was time to face the reality. Ethan had made his decision. He would no longer continue the relationship with Madison. But when he thought breaking things off would be private and contained, Madison had other plans. One evening, she showed up at his apartment with her parents in tow. Ethan was taken aback when he opened the door and saw them standing there, blocking the entrance. Madison held a folder in her hand, likely filled with legal documents and financial statements. Behind her, the real estate agent they had worked with was there as well, apparently prepared to pressure him into buying the house. Madison spoke first, her voice steady but insistent. She reminded Ethan of all their plans, how much time and effort had gone into choosing the house, and how disappointing it was for him to back out. Her parents reinforced her points, layering their words with frustration and thinly veiled threats. Ethan felt the tension in the room spike with every sentence. It was no longer a negotiation. It was an ambush designed to wear him down and force compliance. He stayed calm, taking a step back to assess the situation. Madison tried to corner him emotionally, mentioning their upcoming wedding, mutual friends, and shared dreams. She painted him as irresponsible and cruel for refusing to continue with their house plan. Ethan listened, but he noticed the contradiction. She demanded his money and his commitment, yet she had made clear she wanted financial separation and independence. He realized that any argument or compromise would simply be twisted to her advantage. At one point, Madison's father raised his voice, insisting that Ethan reconsider immediately. He claimed Ethan owed it to Madison, to their families, and to the promises they had made. The room felt suffocating, filled with accusation and expectation. Ethan took a deep breath and finally spoke, his voice firm and unwavering. He told them that he had thought long and hard, and that his decision was final. He said plainly that the engagement was over, and that he would not be participating in any house purchase or financial arrangement with Madison. Madison's face twisted in disbelief. Her parents were shocked, unable to reconcile Ethan's refusal with their expectations. They argued, shouted, and pleaded, but Ethan remained steadfast. He refused to be drawn into emotional manipulation or coercion. Even when Madison leaned closer, her tone dripping with desperation, he held his ground. He repeated, clearly and decisively, that their future together was over and that he would not bend to pressure. The real estate agent, sensing the escalation, tried to mediate, but it was futile. Ethan knew that no professional intervention could change Madison's fundamental demands. Eventually, Madison stormed out, her parents following, leaving Ethan alone in the apartment. The tension lingered long after the door closed, but Ethan felt an unexpected sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, he realized that he had regained control over his life. He sat down, reflecting on the confrontation. It had been intense, exhausting, and emotionally charged, but it had confirmed everything he already suspected. Madison had never intended to build a shared life with him. She had tried to force him into a position where he would sacrifice for her benefit alone. Ethan finally understood that standing firm was not just a choice. It was necessary for his own well-being and future. That night, as silence settled over the apartment, Ethan felt a clarity he hadn't known before. The engagement was over, the pressure removed, and the path forward was his to choose. He realized that this confrontation, though painful, was the turning point he needed to start living on his own terms. Madison refused to let the breakup end quietly. She immediately sought legal counsel, determined to reclaim the $50,000 Ethan had already contributed. Her lawyer drafted a demand letter, claiming that Ethan had caused financial harm and was legally obligated to reimburse her. Ethan read the letter with a mixture of disbelief and frustration. He knew that the claims were baseless, but he also understood that fighting them would require time, energy, and emotional resilience. Still, he refused to give in to an unfair demand. The legal process dragged on for weeks. Madison's team argued that Ethan's withdrawal from the house purchase constituted a breach of an informal agreement. They portrayed him as irresponsible, reckless, and morally liable for her financial loss. Ethan's lawyer countered, pointing out that Madison had insisted on a prenup and financial separation, and that any expectation for him to fund the house equally was neither legally binding nor fair. The court ultimately sided with Ethan, dismissing her claim and reaffirming that he had no obligation to compensate her. Meanwhile, other financial and emotional losses piled up for Madison. The deposit she had made on the house was lost entirely. The engagement ring, which she had attempted to alter by replacing the original diamond with a lower-value stone, was discovered and questioned, further undermining her credibility. Her reputation suffered among friends and acquaintances who had initially supported her side of the story. Even her family faced consequences, as a prior gift of $30,000 intended to support the house plan was taxed heavily, adding to the financial strain. The combination of failed legal action, lost deposit, and public scrutiny left Madison reeling. Every attempt to pressure Ethan or manipulate the situation had failed. Ethan, in contrast, began to feel a growing sense of liberation. He realized that the conflict had tested him in every way, emotionally, financially, and morally, but that standing firm had protected him from far greater losses. Friends who had observed the situation began to confirm Ethan's perspective. They noted patterns in Madison's behavior that showed she had planned to leverage his resources while shielding her own. The prenup, the house negotiations, and even the social media campaigns all pointed to a calculated strategy rather than genuine partnership. Ethan had unwittingly become part of a plan designed to benefit Madison exclusively. As the weeks passed, the legal battles and personal confrontations subsided. Madison retreated back to her parents' home, facing the consequences of her financial and social decisions. Ethan, meanwhile, reinvested his $50,000 in a new property on his own terms. The peace and autonomy he experienced were a stark contrast to the tension and manipulation he had endured. In the end, the entire ordeal highlighted the cost of ignoring red flags in a relationship. It also underscored the importance of boundaries, fairness, and clarity in financial and emotional commitments. Ethan walked away not only unscathed financially, but wiser, stronger, and more certain about the kind of partnership he wanted. Madison, on the other hand, was left to confront the consequences of choices that prioritized self-interest over honesty, respect, and shared responsibility. The legal, financial, and emotional fallout marked a definitive turning point for both of them, but in very different ways. Madison found herself at a crossroads she had never anticipated. With the house lost, the deposit gone, and the engagement broken, she had no choice but to move back in with her parents. The financial independence she had boasted about suddenly felt fragile and illusory. Her plans for a shared life with Ethan had crumbled, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone. The friends who had once supported her began to distance themselves, uneasy with the way she had tried to manipulate both Ethan and the social narrative. Her reputation, carefully curated on social media, began to unravel as more people heard Ethan's side of the story. Ethan finally saw the truth that had been hidden behind Madison's charm and smiles. She had never wanted to build a future together. Every plan, every discussion about marriage and property had been designed to protect her while using him as a financial resource. The realization was painful, but it brought clarity he had been missing. He understood that Madison didn't seek a partner, she sought a sponsor. Her demands, the social manipulation, and the pressure from her family all pointed to the same conclusion. She valued what Ethan could provide more than who he was as a person. By ending the engagement, Ethan protected not only his finances, but also his emotional well-being. In the quiet aftermath, he reflected on the lessons learned. He recognized the importance of boundaries, fairness, and genuine partnership. Ethan felt a sense of relief and liberation, knowing he had acted decisively before investing more of himself into a relationship that was never mutual. Walking away was not defeat, it was self-preservation. He had chosen integrity over manipulation, freedom over control. Ethan knew that in protecting himself, he had made the right decision. The engagement was over, but in its place came clarity, peace, and the beginning of a life built on his own terms.